Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something I know you're already interested in.
Yeah.
Electroencephalography, or EEG.
Right.
You know, that thing where we can actually record the electrical activity happening in your brain.
Yeah.
And get this, EEG readings can actually be used to help people regain control of their hand movements after a stroke.
It's true.
Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, it's really remarkable how these tiny electrical signals can be harnessed for such powerful therapeutic applications. But
Yeah.
before we get ahead of ourselves,
Okay.
let's take a step back and understand the foundation of EEG.
Okay.
It all begins with our nervous system.
So remind me, how does our nervous system actually work on a cellular level?
Well, think of your nervous system as a massive communication network,
Okay.
constantly sending signals throughout your body.
Uh-huh.
The key players in this network are specialized cells called neurons,
Right, neurons, I remember those.
which transmit information through electrical impulses.
Okay, and they communicate with each other, right?
Exactly. Neurons communicate at specialized junctions called synapses.
Synapses.
You can think of a synapse like a tiny bridge between two neurons,
Gotcha.
where chemical messengers called neurotransmitters carry the signal across.
Okay.
And on the receiving end of a neuron are receptors, which act like tiny switches that get flipped on or off by the neurotransmitters.
So it's like a chain reaction. One neuron sends a signal, the neurotransmitter flips the switch on the next neuron, and the message gets passed along.
That's a great way to put it.
Cool.
And this electrical activity, this constant flow of signals between neurons, is what EEG allows us to measure.
Makes sense, but the brain itself is pretty complex, right?
Absolutely.
We're not just talking about a single neuron firing here and there.
The brain is incredibly intricate, with billions of neurons interconnected in complex networks, and different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions.
Okay.
The area we're most interested in when it comes to EEG is the cerebral cortex.
Why the cerebral cortex specifically?
Well, the cerebral cortex is like the brain's outer layer, and it's responsible for many of the higher level functions that make us human,
Okay.
like thinking, language, memory, and sensory perception.
Okay.
And because it's on the surface, it's the area where EEG electrodes can pick up the strongest signals.
Interesting. So tell me more about the cerebral cortex. How is it structured?
Imagine the cerebral cortex like a crumpled up piece of paper.
Okay.
All those folds and wrinkles actually serve a purpose.
Yeah.
They increase the surface area, allowing for more neurons to fit within the skull.
Wow, so we can have more brain power.
And this cortex is divided into 4 main lobes,
Loop.
each with its own specialty.
Okay, I'm picturing this crumpled paper brain now. What are these lobes and what do they do?
Well, you have the frontal lobe, which is sort of like the brain's executive control center,
Okay.
responsible for planning, decision-making, and personality.
Okay.
Then there's the parietal lobe, which processes sensory information from the body, like touch, temperature, and pain.
So if I touch something hot, that signal is processed in my parietal lobe.
Exactly.
Interesting.
Then we have the occipital lobe located at the back of the brain,
Okay.
which is dedicated to processing visual information.
So that's how we see.
Yes. And finally, the temporal lobe,
Uh-huh.
which plays a key role in auditory processing, language comprehension, and memory.
Wow. So each lobe has its own unique function, and I'm guessing all of these lobes are working together, communicating through those neuron networks we talked about.
Precisely.
Wow.
And all of this activity are those billions of neurons firing and sending signals, creates electrical patterns that we can detect with EEG. These patterns are what we call brainwaves.
Brainwaves. Okay, that's where things start to get really interesting for me.
Right.
Tell me more about these brainwaves. What are they exactly?
Brainwaves, also known as EEG rhythms,
Uh-huh.
are basically the collective electrical activity of the cerebral cortex.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that these brainwaves aren't just random noise. They're actually categorized into different frequency bands, each associated with different states of consciousness or brain activity.
So it's like our brain has its own radio station broadcasting at different frequencies depending on what's going on.
That's a great analogy.
Cool.
The slowest brainwaves are called delta waves,
Delta.
and they're most prominent during deep sleep.
Makes sense.
Then you have theta waves, which are associated with drowsiness, light sleep, but also with creativity and deep meditation.
Okay, so what about when we're awake? What kind of brainwaves are happening then?
When you're awake but relaxed with your eyes closed,
Okay.
alpha waves become more prominent.
Alpha.
They're often associated with a state of calm and mental clarity.
Interesting.
Then there are beta waves, which are faster
Okay.
and associated with active thinking, problem solving, and focused attention.
So when I'm doing this podcast, I've got lots of beta waves going on.
Probably.
Cool.
And finally, the fastest brain waves are Gamma waves, thought to be involved in higher-level processing like perception and consciousness.
So even when we're just sitting here seemingly doing nothing, our brains are still buzzing with activity generating these different types of brain waves.
That's right.
That's wild.
It's a constant symphony of electrical activity.
I like that analogy.
And EEG allows us to tune into specific frequencies and see how they change depending on what we're doing, thinking, or feeling.
This is all so fascinating. I had no idea brain waves were so complex and varied.
They're pretty amazing.
But how do we actually measure these brain waves? Do we have to, like, crack open the skull and attach wires directly to the brain?
Thankfully, no brain surgery is required.
Good to know.
EEG is a non-invasive procedure.
Okay, good.
We use electrodes, which are small sensors that are placed on the scalp, using a special system called the 1020 system.
1020.
Sounds complicated, but it's basically a map of the head with standardized locations for placing the electrodes.
So each electrode is like a little listening station picking up the electrical signals from a specific area of the brain.
Exactly.
Cool.
These electrodes detect those tiny electrical fluctuations, which are then amplified and processed by a computer.
Right.
The computer then displays these signals as wavy lines on a screen,
Like,
which we can analyze to understand the different brainwave patterns.
I'm picturing those classic squiggly lines you see in movies about brain activity.
Yeah.
So by looking at those lines, we can actually tell what's going on in someone's brain.
To a certain extent, yes.
Okay.
We can see whether someone is awake or asleep, relaxed, or focused,
Okay.
and even detect abnormalities in brain activity that might indicate a neurological condition.
So EEG is not just about measuring brain waves for the sake of it. It actually has real-world applications.
Absolutely.
Wow, and that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Right.
From diagnosing epilepsy to helping people regain motor control. EEG is being used in incredibly innovative and life-changing ways.
Yeah, it really is.
I can't wait to dive deeper into those applications. This is already blowing my mind.
It's fascinating stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
Right, let's take a break and then we'll come back and we'll talk about some of the applications of this technology.
Sounds good.
Okay, so you mentioned that EEG has some pretty amazing real-world applications. Like, how is this technology being used today?
Well, one of the most well-established uses of EEG is in the diagnosis of epilepsy.
Oh, yeah, epilepsy.
By analyzing brainwave patterns, doctors can identify the telltale signs of seizure activity, those spikes and sharp waves we mentioned earlier.
Right, those. So EEG can actually help pinpoint the source of the seizures in the brain.
Yeah,
That must be incredibly helpful for guiding treatment.
exactly. It allows doctors to determine the type of epilepsy, the location of the seizures, and the most effective treatment options, whether that's medication, surgery, or other therapies.
That's amazing. And I understand EEG is also used to study sleep disorders.
That's right. EEG plays a crucial role in sleep studies, helping to identify and differentiate various sleep stages and diagnose conditions like insomnia, sleep apnea, and narcolepsy. By monitoring brainwave activity throughout the night, we can gain insights into the quality and patterns of a person's sleep.
So instead of just asking someone how well they slept, we can actually see what's happening in their brain while they're snoozing. That seems much more reliable.
Definitely. And EEG can even be used to assess brain damage following a stroke or traumatic brain injury.
How does that work? What are we looking for in the brain waves?
Well, after a brain injury, certain areas of the brain may be damaged or functioning abnormally.
Okay.
This can show up in the EEG as slower brainwave activity or an absence of certain frequencies in the affected regions.
So by comparing the EEG readings of a healthy brain to those of someone who's had a brain injury, doctors can get a better understanding of the extent and location of the damage.
Precisely. And this information is vital for developing personalized rehabilitation plans and predicting potential recovery outcomes. But EEG isn't just limited to medical applications. It's also a powerful tool for cognitive research, allowing us to peek into the inner workings of the mind.
Oh, yeah. I've heard about that researchers are using EEG to study everything from attention and memory to decision-making and language.
Right.
What kind of insights can we gain from these studies?
For example, we know that certain brainwave patterns are associated with different cognitive states. When someone is focused and attentive, we tend to see more beta activity.
Right, beta.
But if they're relaxed or daydreaming, alpha waves become more prominent.
Oh, that's interesting. So by monitoring brainwaves, we can actually see how someone's mental state changes in response to different tasks or stimuli.
Exactly, and this allows us to study the neural mechanisms underlying these cognitive processes in much greater detail. For instance,
Mm.
we can see how the brain responds differently to familiar versus unfamiliar information,
Mm.
or how brainwave patterns change as someone learns a new skill.
That's incredible. It's like we're eavesdropping on the brain's conversations with itself.
In a way, yes, and one area where this research is proving particularly exciting is in the development of brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs.
Now, that's a topic that really captures the imagination controlling computers with your mind. It sounds
Yeah.
like science fiction.
It does, but it's becoming more and more a reality. BCIs essentially allow individuals to interact with computers or other devices using only their brain activity.
So how does it actually work? Do you have to, like, think really hard about a specific command?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay.
BCIs rely on the fact that different brain states,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore different brainwave patterns, are associated with different intentions or mental commands. For example, if you imagine moving your right hand,
Okay.
that mental imagery will produce a distinct pattern of brain activity that can be detected by the EEG.
And so the BCI learns to recognize these specific patterns and translate them into commands for the computer.
Exactly. It's like training a dog. You reward it for the desired behavior. And over time, it learns to associate that behavior with the reward. In the case of BCIs, the reward is seeing the computer respond to your mental command.
That's fascinating. What are some of the potential applications for this technology?
The possibilities are vast, especially for people with severe disabilities. Imagine someone with paralysis regaining control of their limbs through a robotic exoskeleton controlled by their brainwaves, or someone who is unable to speak using a BCI to communicate their thoughts and needs.
Those are incredible examples. It sounds like BCIs have the potential to revolutionize the lives of so many people.
They absolutely do. And we're only just scratching the surface of what's possible as our understanding of the brain and our ability to interpret those complex brainwave patterns continue to advance. I believe we'll see even more incredible applications emerge in the years to come.
It's mind-boggling to think about the future of this technology. But with all this talk about brainwaves and frequencies, I have to ask, how do we actually make sense of all this data? I imagine those EEG recordings can get pretty complex to analyze.
You're right, raw EEG data can be quite messy and difficult to interpret. That's where quantitative electroencephalography, or QEEG, comes into play.
QEEG?
QEEG takes those raw EEG recordings and applies advanced mathematical algorithms to extract meaningful information.
So it's like taking a jumbled up puzzle and putting the pieces together to create a clear picture.
That's a good analogy. QEEG allows us to identify subtle changes in brainwave activity that might not be apparent to the naked eye. It can also create topographic maps of brain activity, showing us which areas of the brain are more or less active during certain tasks or mental states.
So we're not just looking at those squiggly lines anymore. We're getting a much more detailed and nuanced understanding of brain function.
Precisely, and this has opened up new possibilities for both research and clinical applications. For example, QEEG is being used to study cognitive decline and aging, to assess the effectiveness of neurofeedback training, and even to personalize treatment plans for mental health conditions.
Speaking of neurofeedback, that's another fascinating application of EEG that I'm eager to learn more about. It's like using EEG as a tool to train the brain, right?
That's a great way to put it. Neurofeedback, also known as EEG biofeedback, is a technique that uses real-time feedback of brainwave activity to help individuals learn to self-regulate their brain states.
So you can actually see your brainwaves on a screen and try to change them. That sounds almost like a video game for your brain.
It's a bit like that you're essentially playing a game where the goal is to increase or decrease certain brainwave frequencies depending on the desired outcome. For example, if someone is struggling with anxiety, neurofeedback can help them learn to increase alpha activity, which is associated with relaxation and calmness.
So instead of just taking medication to manage the symptoms, neurofeedback empowers people to take control of their own brain function and learn to regulate their emotions more effectively.
Exactly. It's like learning to ride a bike. At first, it takes conscious effort and focus, but over time, it becomes more automatic and effortless. And neurofeedback is showing promising results in helping people manage a wide range of conditions, from ADHD and anxiety to insomnia and chronic pain.
This is all so incredible. It's amazing how much we've learned about the brain and its electrical activity. But I have to ask, where is all this research heading? What does the future hold for EEG?
That's a great question, and one that neuroscientists around the world are actively exploring As our understanding of the brain continues to deepen and the technology continues to advance, I believe we'll see even more groundbreaking applications emerge.
Well, I'm definitely on the edge of my seat, eager to see what the future holds. But for now, I think we should wrap up our deep dive into the world of EEG. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in our deep dive into EEG, from the basics of brainwaves to the incredible applications of this technology in medicine research and even in the realm of brain-computer interfaces. It's clear that EEG is opening up new frontiers in our understanding of the human brain.
Yeah, it really is bridging the gap between our internal mental experiences and the external world.
Right.
For centuries, the inner workings of the mind have been largely a mystery. But now, thanks to EEG and other neuroimaging techniques, we're finally starting to gain a glimpse into that hidden landscape.
It's like we've been given a key to unlock the secrets of consciousness itself. But as with any powerful tool, it's important to consider the potential implications of this technology. Are there any ethical concerns we should be aware of as EEG becomes more widely used?
That's an important point. As EEG technology advances and becomes more sophisticated, questions about privacy, autonomy, and the potential for misuse will inevitably arise. For example, as BCIs become more integrated into our lives, who will have access to our brainwave data? And how can we ensure that this technology is used responsibly and ethically?
Those are critical questions that we need to address as a society. It's crucial that we have open and honest conversations about the ethical implications of these advancements to ensure that they benefit humanity as a whole.
I agree. Transparency, informed consent, and clear guidelines for the use of EEG technology are essential, but even with those considerations in mind, the potential benefits of EEG are undeniable.
Yeah, I completely agree. We've seen how EEG is already transforming the lives of people with epilepsy, sleep disorders, and brain injuries. And as research continues, I'm confident we'll discover even more applications that can improve human health and well-being.
Yeah, imagine a future where EEG is routinely used to screen for early signs of cognitive decline, allowing for earlier interventions and potentially slowing the progression of conditions like Alzheimer's disease. Or a world where neurofeedback is readily available to help people manage stress, improve their sleep, and enhance their cognitive performance.
It's an exciting vision of the future, but even beyond those practical applications, EEG is also changing the way we understand ourselves as human beings.
Right. For centuries, philosophy and psychology have grappled with the nature of consciousness and the relationship between the mind and the brain. Now with EEG, we have a tool to study these profound questions in a more empirical and scientific way.
It's like we're finally starting to unravel the mysteries of what it means to be human, to think, to feel, to experience the world around us.
And as we delve deeper into these mysteries, we're likely to challenge many of our long-held assumptions about who we are and what we're capable of.
It's a journey of discovery that's just beginning, and EEG is leading the way. So as we conclude our deep dive into the world of brainwaves, I want to leave you with this thought. Never underestimate the power of your own mind.
And never stop exploring the incredible potential that lies within. Because as we've seen, the more we learn about the brain, the more we realize just how much more there is to discover.
So keep those synapses firing, stay curious, and keep exploring the fascinating world of neuroscience. Until next time, keep diving deep.